let's stay with some of the developments of what we've seen. Interestingly also, looking at the Free State and what Makhala was talking about there, and we do have in studio with us political analyst Dr Thapelo Tselapedi and Professor Susan Booysen, who are talking to us about, of course, what we continue to see. So thank you so much to you both. And interestingly, I'm going to start with you, Prof. I mean, you look at the Free State, and we just saw, of course, this is a province. When you saw in the past, as Makhala is talking, is that there was an ANC, a DA, EFF, and FF Plus presence. Right now, there is, of course, the former Premier, who was also the former Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, who's leading ACT. Listening to the party agent there, she says that they're quite happy because for them, it's been just 9 months of campaigning. Let's look at that dynamic there.
Yes, it was certainly 9 months of campaigning, not always of a high profile. Now we saw them, now we didn't, and we had a sense that they lacked resources and just didn't reach much more than the northern Free State areas where the former Premier's strongholds are. And so it's been an uneven campaign, and I'm not surprised that they are seemingly not faring very well.
And Doc, when one looks at, of course, what we saw previously, and you look at the results before, as Makhala says, it would be, the ANC, it would be the DA, it would be the EFF in the province of the Free State, as they've seen in the past. But now, looking at the dynamic, is that likely to change? Possibly.
I mean, look, we're sitting at roughly, 30% nationally of the votes that have at least come in and have been audited. And I think when you get into the provinces, you've seen roughly 50%, at least that has been counted and as well audited. So it's a bit difficult to tell, but I think it's still remaining the same, at least when it looks at those top 3 political parties in the Free State. And obviously one is not, I'm certainly not surprised by the outcome of that there is Magashule's party. There was quite a lot of allegations of corruption, quite a lot of people were dissatisfied inside the ANC and outside of the ANC about his own governance. So it's not too much of a change. Of course, there's a decrease in a couple of parties here that we're looking at. There's obviously, this is part of a broader reflection of the general dissatisfaction around political institutions in the country.
And as you say, of course, quite interesting and important to note is the fact that, of course, this is the result as it stands now. Hasn't been called. Anything can change. It's still too early in the game. But let me stay with something that you said. The difficulty that the former Secretary General had in some parts when we saw on the campaign trail, some very difficult questions arising about some very serious governance issues as well in some parts in the Free State.
Look, there's a lot that he has to answer to. We saw the state capture report. Of course, there's been, unfortunately, a bungling of the asbestos case again in the Free State by the National Prosecuting Agency. That's disappointing. Of course, I think there needs to be some level of capacity put onto that thing. But we'll see it now with a different version or iteration now of the Scorpions that has been promulgated there. But again, I think Ace Magashule has quite a lot of cases to answer to. And we are seeing that the prosecutorial agencies have brought back some of the witnesses from the United States to come back and give some sort of evidence to, at least in their case, to strengthen their case. But certainly doesn't just speak to him. It speaks to a whole host of also ANC members still inside, and some have left, some have gone to different political organizations that still must face issues around corruption. So we are going to see a lot more of that than the narrative around, well, yes, you're a new political party, but there are these skeletons that are still following you.
And of course, this, as you see on your screens, these are just some of the numbers as things stand right now. So critical to note, it's just where we are now. This is not the final outcome, and we are still quite a long way to go. But Prof, we will listen to Thapelo raising a very important point around the state capture report. It raises a broader question on the commissions that we've seen, the reports that we've seen. Some gather dust, others you see an effort of implementing some, not all, of the recommendations. What do South Africans then make of that? Do we still even need these commissions?
I think some of the election results are exactly reflecting what South Africans are making of it, because South Africans came into the Cyril Ramaphosa term as president with high expectations of definitive action, of cleanups happening, and didn't quite bargain on getting a president who got bogged down into, can he fire this person, can he take disciplinary action, can he suspend, can there be a step aside, heaven knows all of the different options. And overall he came out of that looking rather weak. And we know that a big feature of Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency is, more than anyone, it didn't start with him, but more than anyone else, is to appoint commissions, appoint panels, appoint this and that, all to investigate. And one often gets a sense that it is to water tread and hope that with time the problem will actually go away. But these problems have not been going away. And the record is there, and we could see in opinion polls, some of the credible ones before the election, the issues that South Africans focus on. Corruption is always right up top three most of the time.
Before I even move away from that particular point, you speak about, this particular state capture report. It spoke very, very sternly against the Parliament.
Oh, yes.
Because Parliament was found wanting when it also comes to its own effective oversight. And I suppose then a lot of South Africans would look to see then the composition of the 7th Parliament. Does it become more of the same or different?
Yes, it will have to be different, and I would hope that if the ANC then enters, I think they will have to enter into other party or parties into a governing coalition, that the other party would be one that doesn't just look at a few positions and much patronage, but actually looks at improving the quality of governance and getting cleaner government there, and insisting that the ANC is also, as coalition partner then, much more transparent on those issues.
Doc, are we likely to see, in your view, I know, of course, sometimes it becomes difficult to even tell before there's a composition, but when it comes to the work of Parliament, the 6th administration, there were some things that it was lauded for. There were some, in fact, the 6th Parliament, there were some things it was lauded for. Others were saying that you did see a bit more of movement in some areas, but others are still saying that there are some areas where a bit more accountability could have been shown, a bit more work could have been, displayed by this particular Parliament, especially when it comes to some of the burning issues of South Africans.
Yes, I agree. I think for me, the more jarring situation was the matter of Phala Phala. I think the subcommittee had, pronounced on the matter. Parliament as well pronounced, and it was quite interesting then to see the association institutions such as SARS speaking on it, giving a different perspective, then having another body like the Public Protector giving a different perspective. It was almost as if they were closely ranked in a sense. And I think what that isolates about the collapse of the inability for Parliament to keep the executive accountable is that it goes to the political culture, not necessarily of the system, but of the people. And I think that's what these elections are, or this electoral outcome are becoming, as a pushback that actually, yes, on the one hand, we want different people inside Parliament, but on the other hand, how do we influence all of these state institutions so that they cohere, one feeding off the other in a manner that's accountable in addressing a lot of the concerns of citizens.
So what I'm hearing you say is residents saying, don't forget we put you there, and we're expecting you to advance our interests.
Yes.
And Prof, when you then look at, some of the political parties, there's a very interesting one, the ACDP. Earlier on, I was listening to some of their leaders, and they talk about how they're waiting for their strongholds to come through, and they know that they're going to be able to make some inroads there. When you look at that particular political party, has it been able to find its place and cement itself? Yes, it may have been in Parliament, but when it comes to the South African politics on the ground, would you say it has cemented itself?
I would not say. It's so difficult for a small political party, irrespective of who they are, to make a stand, to get its weight spread across different committees, to participate in all the different legislative processes. And yes, there are the occasions, and small parties have been treated reasonably well. I think they can be treated also better in the next Parliament in terms of speaking time. But they do get speaking time to make big ethical statements and good speeches, etc. And I think they could have done better on that front.
How much of a difference do they make, though, then, listening to what you say?
A very small difference. They have been voting alliance fodder in general political, party political alliances that form around legislation, particular votes and debates in Parliament. I think they pulled their weight as part of that informal kind of alliance in there. But as autonomous party, they were just too small and poorly defined in parliamentary politics.
So, Doc, if we then have a bit more of them, does it change what Prof is saying, or is it still more of the same?
Members of the party. Look, I think at the parliamentary, at least in terms of the parliamentary work of Parliament, I think it would be very difficult for them to sort of have a bigger voice. Operationally, they don't have a lot of members, of course, to be sitting in those subcommittees and contribute. I think beyond that, the other limitation of the party is that they seem to be sort of sectional. They represent a particular constituency in South African communities. We've seen their position on the matter of Israel and Palestine, and I think that sort of divided a lot of their constituency about how should they position themselves internationally. And I think we saw that as well, its implications in the Western Cape, the Muslim community and so forth. So I think they've not been able to gather a sort of comprehensive vision for the country beyond the sort of religious tones. I think that's where they've situated themselves at.
What do you think about the UDM?
The UDM?
The UDM, yes.
Look, I think the UDM has sort of been refreshed by the new leadership in a sense, and I think that's a good thing. I think for the UDM, they need to have a wider pool of talent that they can draw from. I think similarly they struggle with the same issues as the ACDP with not having enough people. So you don't want to just see two leaders speaking on a matter, on policy, on the economy, on land. You want to be able to see the youth representative, young people. You want to see people who are also technical on different matters. And I think that's been a difficulty. But beyond that, I think there needs to be a possibility for the party to grow beyond, again, the sectional interests or geographical interests.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts then, Prof, on the UDM.
I think they're going to really struggle to make a bigger impact under a new leader in Parliament, even if youth and new leadership by definition brings some rejuvenation. We look at currently, as your profile there shows, they stand in a region of 20,000 votes, and if about a third of the votes are counted now, they're not going to make it much more at best beyond 2 or so members of Parliament by current indications. And they're going to have another uphill battle to promote specific policy positions, and as a coalition part, they're probably not big enough and available enough to be a significant coalition partner.
2024, the story of COPE continues to unfold. Earlier on, Musiwa Lukota saying that he's going to be handing over and all of that, speaking about his impressions of this election, Doc. And I was speaking to one analyst earlier on who says there's nothing actually to hand over, because according to him, COPE is one of those organizations that he says potentially may need a lot more injection in terms of, coming back again. But let me pause you there for a second. We do have, Mfundo. In fact, coincidentally here, we're talking about the UDM,
yes,
looking at them in Parliament, and you happen to have Ngabayom Sikwankwa from
Indeed.
the UDM.
Indeed, I am joined by Ngabayom Sikwankwa just to reflect, as the numbers continue to come in, just how they're feeling as UDM. Mr. Nkwankwa, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Susan. Thank you for having us.
No, it's a pleasure. Your view on just what we're seeing on the leaderboard currently insofar as the UDM's performance?
Well, so far so good. We have no complaints whatsoever, simply because the regions where we know that are our strongholds, especially in the Eastern Cape, the results for those regions haven't come true yet. And what we did our own analysis of the results, looking at different regions in the Eastern Cape to try and make sense of that 21,000, for example, that we have on the board currently. And we've picked up that there's growth everywhere, growth in those regions. And if we can make sure that we grow even in the regions like your Amatole region, the OR Tambo region, if we can experience growth, for example, even in Buffalo City Municipality and so on, then we'll know that we are well on our way to actually improving on the last elections performance, which is what we're focusing on, because remember, in these elections we focused in particular on trying to secure our base before we grow elsewhere in the country.
But then if we had to look at the Eastern Cape, which is your strongest base or stronghold for the UDM, it's currently at 2.2%, placing you fourth, ANC's first, DA, EFF, and then you're fourth. And you're saying that, yes, there is some sort of an improvement. What of those analysts that say the pace is too slow?
Well, it's simply because the OR Tambo region, as I have mentioned, Amatole region are not in yet. The pace, it's the counting pace that is slow and not necessarily the growth of the party that is slow. Because if you were to look at the different, I'll encourage them to zoom into the regions, the performance, what we did in 2019 versus how we're faring now. While the votes are still being counted in 2024, they are going to pick up growth, which means the campaign we mounted in the Eastern Cape in particular, especially us declaring the president as the premier candidate for that province, has worked. All that we are going to need to do now is to build on that in trying to make sure that we have representation in other provinces as well.
All right, Mr. Nkwankwa, thank you very much for your time this evening. That's the UDM's Ngabayom Nkwankwa speaking to us, quite confident that at the very least at the Eastern Cape, they will get a sizable amount of the votes, and most certainly, according to him, there will be significant growth. What we're witnessing here, according to him, is just the slow pace of counting. So we'll take it back to you, Bongiwe, in the main studio.
Thank you very much, Mfundo. It's very interesting that, he says the counting pace is what is slow, not the growth of the party. So I'm putting that to both of you. Do you agree with that statement, starting with you, Prof?
No, I don't. I've heard so many parties in interviews from the floor here this afternoon claim that it's just the pace and the positioning of the available counting that doesn't show that they're actually growing parties. And so we do not think so. It will be very, very difficult for this party to grow. Like on the board, there is quite a range of existing parties. Also think of the PAC, AZAPO, etc. Good. They are really struggling to grow. Good is a bit better, doing a bit better so far than parties like AZAPO and PAC and several others, but some of those small parties are really stagnating, and I won't be surprised if a few of them we don't see in the next parliament.
Briefly for you, Doc?
I think when Prof said we, she definitely includes me here. So I agree with her. I think, South Africa is hard, of course. You never know what the issue is. You need some charisma from the leader. You need a proper policy direction. And maybe it's not an issue of policy. Maybe it's just that they don't have charismatic leadership. And I think the party has been here for a while. They should have been able to grow a base in the Eastern Cape and several other regions or provinces. And I think they've really struggled with it. And that may speak to the issue of the inability to have a more comprehensive vision about the country.
All right, of course, still quite a lot to talk about, but thank you so much to you both for your time. Do appreciate you stopping by. That's a political analyst there, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, and Professor Susan Booysen, who are in conversation with us about some of what we're seeing so far when it comes to the counting